In this video, we're going to look at when a youth pastor takes a new church job. What are some principles that you can live by? And I, as a 15-year youth ministry veteran, have made several job transitions, but I've learned some things along the way, and I want to talk about some of the pros and the cons about when you choose to share this with your church leadership and what I recommend doing. Welcome to the Hybrid Ministry Show. Well, hey everybody, welcome to the Hybrid Ministry Show. My name is Nick Clayson, and in this episode, we're going to be answering this question: what is some advice for looking at other church jobs while you're still working at your current one? Specifically, according to this anonymous poster, they said they're currently in negotiations with their current church. They love the place, however, the workload is undoable. They're not willing to budge on adding staff to the student ministry, and so they're looking at other jobs to get an idea of what other church staffing ratios might look like, and in the midst, they may have found what seems to be better circumstances over and over again. Should they let their current church know that they're applying, or should they wait until they get a real response and interviews from the other churches? I know it's not, but it almost feels like I'm going behind their back. But my main goal is to really see if I'm off on what I'm asking for. If you've been in this place before or have any advice, please help. Well, the first thing that I want to say is that I believe that there are 4 principles when it comes to looking for a new church job that you should just, be aware of and have kind of on your horizon. Number 1 is it's not disloyal to look. There's nothing wrong with looking. I understand it. You say in here, it feels like I'm doing something wrong, I'm going behind their back. I understand that feeling. I've had that feeling. But you got to understand that there's nothing inherently or immorally wrong. Now, if you're doing something sneaky or you're lying, of course there's a moral obligation baked within to that. But in the grand scheme of things, you haven't done anything wrong. The other thing is you're not obligated when you're looking for other jobs to tell your church. That's my personal opinion, and that's what I believe from a moral, ethical dilemma, right? Hey, quick break. Let me ask you a question. Are you still waking up every day as a youth pastor, scrambling to figure out what you need to post on your social media? Blurry dodgeball pic, a video that your leader sent you that's a little bit pixelated because iPhone still hasn't updated fully to RCS yet. You see, you don't need that kind of stress this fall. That's why I created the fall seasonal social media pack for youth pastors. It is 3 months worth of done for you content. Done for you, paired with some customization so that you and your leaders and your students are the faces and the personalities on your student ministry Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts feed. See, here's the thing. You can grab my pack right now over on Patreon. And did you know that monthly Hybrid Hero Patreon members who only pay $4 per month and get a bonus podcast, they get this pack completely for free. So if you do the math, for 3 months worth of social media content, it's only $12, where the pack is $17.99. Either way, it is a steal for you, and it will take away the stress of posting. And you can grab that pack right now and start becoming a master at social media and hybrid ministry in your youth ministry context. Rooting for you as you are crushing it this fall in your student ministry. The third one is you should try to keep an open communication about your workload. And according to this question, it sounds like you are, or at least you're attempting to. And this is why I am such a strong proponent and advocate for regular one-on-one check-ins. So for example, at one church I worked at, my boss had an open door policy, and it was hey, come find me if you need me. And for my personality type, a guy who doesn't really like to be told what to do and doesn't really love taking advice from other people, wants to kind of figure it out for themselves. I never needed him. But there were times he's you never come to me. And he took that as me being uncoachable and unteachable. It just wasn't my vibe, right? But my very next job with my very next boss, regular one-on-ones, not my favorite thing, to be honest, because again, same thing, personality, to do things on my own. However, it helped me stay just in the loop of how he was feeling about me, how he was feeling about my job performance, what I could do better. And when you in a regular one-on-one get feedback about what you could be doing better, or what you're doing well, that's a natural, normal thing. When you're never having regular one-on-ones, then when you do have a talking to, so to speak, with your boss, then you're getting in trouble. And so if you don't have regular one-on-ones, first of all, that's on your manager. But second of all, like an opportunity for you to lead up in this moment and ask like, hey, can we have a regular check-in where we can evaluate and analyze like how this is going and like what we could do, to make it better. And one thing I say to the staff that I lead is like, don't just bring problems, but bring solutions. And so if you feel like the workload is unmanageable, it very well may be, and you may be getting to a spot where like you do have to make a decision and you do have to choose to leave. However, what are some other solutions that you could bring to your manager? Like perhaps some of this like workload, I could hand some of these things off to some of my unpaid volunteers and I could start to treat them as like quasi staff members, certain things like that. Like what would it look like to be able to do that? And I don't know your current context and all of your current situations, but if you truly did want to stay, what would it look like if you did something like that? And then my fourth and final option is until God calls you anywhere, like bloom where you're planted, which means like, as soon as like you start looking elsewhere and maybe even like get your heart set on somewhere else, it's really easy once that like seed of potential is planted in your head that you just like want to chase it and you're ready to mentally check out where you are and start to check in somewhere else. And my encouragement is just continue to bloom where God has you planted for the time being. And God in his timing, and I can say this based on my own experience, God is always perfect in his timing. And God, when it's clear that it's time to go, God will make it very clear when it's time for you to go. In the meanwhile, stay completely locked in and bloomed where you're planted. Now listen, I get all that stuff sounds gravy. Those are like 4 kind of like high level principles. It's not disloyal to look. You don't need to disclose to your church when you're looking. Keep open communication about where your workload's at and do everything you can to bloom where you're planted. However, in this next section, we're going to explore what are the 3 kind of different like options of telling your bosses, your senior pastor, your church that you're considering looking, and what are the pros and what are the cons? Because fact is, you could really do any of these 3 different scenarios, and there are pros and cons to all of them. Let's check it out. So as I said in the beginning, I've been youth ministry for 15 years. I've been in 5 different churches, some part-time all the way back in college, others full-time, several years, just a couple years, and in every single step of the way, I've made different decisions about when I chose to disclose that I was looking. So let's talk about when you tell your church or your boss or your senior pastor or whoever it is as your direct supervisor that you feel obligated to let know that you're looking, when you tell them everything. Okay. So I worked in a church one time where they said, hey, if you are starting to get like squeamish and squirmy about your job, let us know. And you got to think about it. Like, of course they would say that. Why? It helps them brace for impact, right? And it does in a way put them in the driver's seat. Okay. And we'll get to that and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But if you do tell them everything, what are some of the pros of that? Well, the first pro is it does build transparency and trust with your current church, right? It'll let them know exactly where you're at, and you won't blindside them with any sort of decision. Additionally, if you're feeling this sort of way about like your workload, and you let them know like, hey, listen, I'm looking, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that, like it may actually also lead to a resolution if they do value who you are and what you bring to the table in your work, ethic, and they do want to retain you, then if like it's more than just like, hey, like this is hard, you're like, hey, this is hard and I'm looking, that might put a little bit of like a different fire underneath them if you tell them early on. And then the third pro in this is like it could potentially allow for a smoother transition if they support your exploration and potential future interviews if they're on board all the way. Now, because if they're not, for example, like you got to figure out how to do that without getting like exposed or caught. And again, that's where it feels like, it feels like you're doing something wrong, but just like put yourself in the shoes of like if you are like a CFO at like a big company, right? And like you're like, hey, I have a job interview somewhere else. Like, I don't know, I guess like sometimes that can be like a tricky thing to do, but like for the most part, like transitions, people moving up, people moving out, like that's a kind of normal part of like everyday life. In church, we tend to take it a little bit harder because there's like a personal aspect to it. So the cons of letting them know everything early on is it could strain your current relationship, right? And that's the tension. Like the pro is it builds trust and transparency. The con is it could potentially strain it. And the fear is if it strains it is like, will they ever fully lock into you as like the youth pastor at that church? Or will there always be a seed of doubt? Like as soon as something gets bad or as soon as something gets rocky, you're out. You know what I mean? The second con is it might lead to immediate pressure or even termination if they see you as disloyal. And that obviously, that's the worst case scenario. If you let them know and they're like, all right, fine, if you want to be out somewhere else, we'll let you go. And, that would stink, and you got to provide for your family, and you can't really be without a paycheck. Like, I get that fear, It's probably, unless and like have evidence that it would happen, like it's probably not going to happen if the people that you work with are reasonable, but, it could, right? And then the third thing is like, you also risk the word of it spreading and potentially affecting relationships within your church or even like on your church staff and what people think about you and, whether or not they believe that you're going to be kind of like around for the long haul. Here's the pros and cons in the middle, which, spoiler, this is typically the one I choose. But I will be honest, like, a lot of church, like early on interview stuff, like it ends up being a pretty prolonged period and it ends up fizzling out. And if they say no to you, A, I feel like that's God closing the door. And then B, like you don't, again, have to disclose, have people question, whatever. Tell them in the middle. The middle spot for me is often an in-person, like sort of site visit. And that's where like, all right, I feel like I need to like say something. Okay. Now, I haven't always done that. Just full disclosure. And, when I have not done that, and then I just like told them all the way until the end after I accepted, wasn't super great. But otherwise, right? Like, I'd like to try and tell them like, if I go to a site visit, like, hey, there's this opportunity. That's kind of like where I would prefer if I could, and if I feel safe in the job that I'm in, all that type of stuff. So the pros of telling them in the middle is it balances transparency with also some caution while giving you time to kind of assess where you're at with some of your current options. The second thing is it allows you to gauge their reaction once you have concrete offers, right? And that also helps kind of strengthen your position as a staff member. And then the third one is it may encourage them to act on your needs. For example, like you're feeling overwhelmed when they now see that like you're serious and like you actually have something like on the actual line. Of course, the cons are it could backfire if they discover your job search earlier and you didn't tell them. And then, of course, it damages trust even more. You could be risked as seen as manipulative if you're using it for like just simply a negotiation tactic to stay put. And then the third one is it may complicate leaving if they retaliate or do choose to make a sudden change and you don't yet have an offer, signed all the way. The final one is don't tell them until you accept it all. And in full disclosure, I've done this a couple times and it hasn't been amazing. So I will say, like, learn from my mistakes. This is not necessarily what I would recommend. However, here are some of the pros, right? The pros are you maintain your current position, your income, your security, all that stuff the entire way during the search. You avoid potential conflicts or pressure from your current church leadership, and it gives you full control over the timing of your departure, which I would say you're entitled to, right? The downside is how the church chooses to react, and like you can't control those types of things. However, I think the earlier you tell them, the more trust and transparency you have, and it also helps them kind of, like I said, like brace for some of that impact. The cons are could risk damaging your reputation if they do find out through other means. Could also burn bridges. Like again, people's feelings might just be hurt, and they feel like you never gave them a fair shake. And then finally, they may leave. It might leave a lot less time for like a smooth transition, all that type of stuff impacting your ministry. Let me just leave you with this kind of like final bonus hack. Like when you're leaving, it's natural to feel bad and to want to stay and to hang on as long as you can. And I've done that a handful of times. Like, hey, I can stick on for 6 more weeks. Like after they know they start to make decisions without you, they have to move on. And the longer you stay, you're just like a dangling dead fish. Like you run out of stuff to do. They start dishing your work off to other people. And so, while you do want a smooth transition, especially for the students, and you want them to feel like they amply were able to say goodbye, within the office and within the decision-making framework and culture, like it is better if you let them know, and then it's a quick kind of departure. So, hey, hope you found this episode helpful. If you did, give it a like, give us a subscribe. We're going to be answering some more questions, so you can do that right here on the screen, or you can see what the next video is going to be that we're going to be answering from some different questions that we're finding in different youth pastor Facebook groups. But until next time, my friends, and as always, don't forget, stay hybrid.